Hello everyone and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Tom Hellick. Parents are having a tough time these days, especially during the pandemic, finding quality, affordable child care. So a coalition of child care providers and community leaders in the North Country have joined forces to ask state lawmakers for emergency funding to help working families pay for child care.
We need people to understand that childcare in the Adirondack region is in crisis. We need to invest in these programs to save our economy.
It's very expensive to have your children into childcare, and quite a bit of our jobs in the North Country pay less than the living wage.
People don't realize that it's not just about people that have kids that need childcare, it's our whole system. If parents don't have childcare, they can't go to work. If they can't go to work, our economy suffers.
We know that birth to 3 years of age is actually the most critical time period for brain development.
I know that every child that walks in my door leaves with a better foundation than they had when they walked in. That's what I remind myself when I'm working 12 to 14-hour days, 80 hours a week.
We need money on both ends. We need money for families to be able to afford care, and we need money for programs so that they can afford to give that care.
They're hoping that video they produce will not only raise awareness, but also get people to reach out to their representatives in Albany to get them to commit to $1.5 million in child care subsidies for working families in Clinton, Essex, and Franklin counties.
In Clinton, Essex, and Franklin counties, there are about 20,000 children up to the age of 12, and the average family here pays $15,000 a year if they have 2 children in care. For a single infant in a child care center, that number can be almost $13,000 a year.
But for many working families in the North Country who don't receive assistance and are just getting by, living paycheck to paycheck, that's more than they can afford.
That's simply impossible to do. The median income is only about $52,000 a year for a household here. So you're looking at paying a very significant percentage of cost to childcare, and we happen to know that childcare has actually surpassed housing as the largest cost for most families that reach that what's referred to as the ALICE threshold, the families that are working and yet still struggling.
And that's why the Child Care Coordinating Council of the North Country has teamed up with the North Country Workforce Development Board and the Adirondack Foundation's Birth to 3 Alliance to produce this video featuring child care providers that they hope will not only raise awareness, but get people to call on lawmakers to put $1.5 million in this year's budget to subsidize child care for families in the 3-county region.
Because when you're disbursing $15,000 specifically for child care, you haven't paid for your housing, your food, your transportation, anything else. And so, so child care is a huge burden on family. And in turn, that becomes a huge burden on the economy because people cannot afford to go to work.
Even when the unemployment rate hit 15% last spring, Sylvie Nelson says many jobs went unfilled because workers were not only having difficulty finding and affording childcare, but with schools closing and kids learning remotely, many parents had no choice but to stay at home.
We were expecting here at the One Workforce Centers to see an influx of people because, you know, the unemployment rate went drastically, you know, upward. And for some reason that never happened. And one of the things we're thinking is that a lot of people are staying home with their children.
And over 90% of businesses stated that they have suffered either in terms of profitability or productivity because their employees have unmet childcare needs.
And it's more than just the high cost. There are long waiting lists for every opening at the 200 licensed childcare, Head Start, and preschool programs in the 3 counties.
We have about 4 to 5 children for each slot that is actually available. So that leaves, you know, almost 80% of kids in this North Country region that cannot find a regulated childcare slot.
We're fortunate because New York sometimes is a little bit more ahead of the curve on these type of issues. And just the fact that the governor mentioned it in his State of the State address, I think that's encouraging. But, you know, we need to see dollars And the fact that it's been being discussed is great, but it's like we need dollars, and we don't need them in a year. We need them like now, because families are being affected, children are being affected.
They're hoping to convince lawmakers to commit to $1.5 million this year in subsidies, and then long-term invest in higher pay and other financial incentives for providers to encourage more child care centers to open. Until that happens, though, thousands of families are going to have to count on relatives, neighbors, and unlicensed daycare providers. COVID has made it even more difficult for many families juggling work and child care. At times over the past 11 months, about 30% of the providers in the region were closed due to the pandemic. And COVID has made it even more difficult for many families juggling work and child care. At times over the past 11 months, about 30% of the providers in the region were closed due to the pandemic. About 100 essential workers, though, were fortunate to have their child care costs covered by the first federal relief package back in the spring, getting daycare for their kids at the YMCA's Bright Beginnings in Plattsburgh and at the YM Malone through at least the end of this month. There's no word yet if any of the stimulus packages now being considered by Congress will include more funds for child care. By the way, you can watch the full Stand Up for Child Care Adirondacks video and get info on how to contact lawmakers. You'll find it on our website at mountainlake.org.